Hey everybody, Ty here. I hope everyone is doing well, and I hope you're excited for this one because I'm pretty sure some of you have been waiting to get the little sneak preview of our upcoming season. Obviously, fall is essentially here. Meteorological fall starts on September 1st, and the official fall equinox begins right around the time that you're seeing this video. But obviously, we have winter coming up here. I'm sure a lot of you are curious as to what these previews will show and what ultimately will happen as well. We've been talking in brief detail some of the things that I've been seeing, but now we're going to get a little bit more in depth. I hope you're excited for this one again. I'm excited to bring this one to you. That being said, let's go ahead and get into things, but we also need to go into this with the knowledge that everything that you see here in this video today is subject to change. The reality is, this is September, we're looking all the way to December, and we're looking at 90-day averages, not even 30-day averages. So this does not sum up what every day, week, or even what every month could be like. So take some of this with a grain of salt, but the trends that we're seeing here, and that's going to be the main focus that we have here, are very, very interesting. So without further ado, let's get into it. And we'll get into it by starting out with the obvious. We've been talking about it. We talked about it in the October outlook that we dropped recently as well. We're shifting from a neutral Enzo to a weak La Nina here. So this is going to cause a lot of change over the lower 48, especially as we get into midwinter and beyond particularly. But changes could start as early as the very beginning of winter in December. Meteorological winter starts on December 1st. And the official solstice is on the 21st to 23rd. It's actually 21st to 22nd, but some people say 23rd, so I'm trying to appease everyone here. But that being said, some interesting things to make note is based off of this outlook as of right now, and it's really coming as no surprise given the fact that this is a typical La Nina calling card. Above average temperatures towards the southwest, Florida Peninsula in particular above average here. And then over towards the northwest is where we have that below average signal. This is a typical La Nina outlook here. Nothing too far out of the ordinary. Sometimes with the stronger La Nina, we would see this maybe expand out towards the east a little bit, start to include some of the northern states, northern plains in particular. But as of right now, this is kind of that classic look without being anything too crazy at this point. Keep in mind, again, it's a 90-day average, so it's not really telling the full story here. A couple other things that I'm watching, of course, is Alaska, and usually this is a pretty good indicator and usually an increase in confidence on my end as to what we could see out towards the northwest. Now, typically during this time of year, we also will look for the curvature also between these above and below average areas and the areas in between being the point in which we could have our storm track here. This isn't always accurate, but at this range, just at this range of time that we're looking at now, just about anything goes, I would say at this point. So looking at what we have here, expecting a little bit more troughing and more of a storm track to be existent over towards the northern states. Anywhere that's south of the trough tends to usually have more of the above average temperatures. That's usually a general rule of thumb. It's not always how it goes, but more often than not for the lower 48, that's usually the order of things. So again, pretty much everything that you see south of this line pretty much shooing to be above average here. The mystery is what happens with these Midwestern Central Plain states and maybe even the Ohio Valley. I think those are going to be open points in regards to outlooks in the future here. I'm really intrigued to see just what happens with this and how that warm and cold air ends up mixing, because that could play a big part in our winter storm threat as we go throughout the season. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and actually take a look at the precipitation outlook to go with it. And an interesting thing to make note of here, and it kind of goes along with my initial thought of maybe a storm track kind of shifting with a trough here in the northwest and then kind of shifting a little bit south and eastward here, is that we have an above average signal over here towards the Ohio Valley, along with parts of the west central plains here, and especially the northwestern plains. So Depending on how cold air mixes with this will also yield more opportunities for winter events, not just over here towards the northwest, but maybe even the Ohio Valley. Another classic La Nina calling card is deep south often tends to be a little bit dry, but do not let this deceive you. It doesn't mean that there won't be chances of precip. It's usually a little bit more fewer and further in between. So need to watch this area, especially a little further off towards the north going forward. So even these areas to the south, I wouldn't fully trust this just yet. And keep in mind, again, we're looking at a 90-day average, not a 30-day average or 7-day average. So this all is subject to change, and it's completely variable at this point. Another classic calling card, and I have more confidence in this than anything else, is over towards the southwest. We have the opportunity for even more below average precip over here. This is definitely a classic La Nina calling card, nothing too far out of the norm. The storm track usually is way too far to the north to really yield much in the way of precipitation for the region here. There is a feature that we always have to keep an eye out for, and that'll be the Pineapple Express. We'll be looking into greater detail with that in future outlooks here, but it's just a little bit too early to latch on to much of anything. We always know that we have atmospheric rivers that tend to occur here, and they've been pretty prominent over the last couple years, despite at times even seeing outlooks like this. So this is another thing that we're going to have to keep an extra close watch on as well, especially over towards the Sierra Mountains, because that's where we've had some of the most significant impacts in recent years. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and go to the other half of winter here, because winter goes all the way from December all the way to the beginning or middle part of March, depending on whether you go by meteorological or astronomical fall. So this is January, February, and March here. Again, classic La Nina signal. And I think at this point, this is a setup that kind of reminds me of some of the earlier years where I was on YouTube when severe weather outbreaks were kind of running rampant between 2023, 2024 in particular. I remember seeing outlooks very similar to this on a month-to-month basis, and those were pretty busy times. I'm not guaranteeing that this is exactly the case, especially at the range that we're looking at now, but this could be interesting, especially as we go further along here. I do think this yields to a setup for more winter storms as well, especially with a increased confidence in those below average temperatures over towards the northwest, but also that increase in below average temperatures towards maybe the northern plains and even Midwest as a whole here too. And remember, with us looking at this as a 3-month average, if this shifts further to the south, that only further kind of proves I wouldn't even say my point, but more so my early hypothesis here. So otherwise, it's pretty much checking out as a very similar look to what we saw with December, January, and February. Nothing too far out of the norm. Classic La Nina calling card setup. Southwest above average here, nothing too far out of the norm. Florida Peninsula, same thing. Kind of variable over here towards the eastern seaboard, but opportunities for cold air to mix in do come into play. And I'll get more into the details with that in a minute here, because once we start to really get into the model data is where things get really intriguing. So again, we'll go ahead and make sure we cross our T's and dot our I's here. No pun intended, because if you look at my name, there you go. But if you were to look over toward the southwestern part of or southeastern part of Alaska, you see the below average temperature signal kind of popping up over there as well, and then of course you see that kind of translating over again towards the northwestern states. If we were to go ahead and shift our attention over to our precipitation outlook, it's a very similar signal, classic La Nina calling card, but notice a little slight trend to the south with the precipitation. That's an interesting signal to me, especially for those of us in the Tennessee Valley, deep south in the Appalachians here. Especially as we get towards the back half of winter, this is when we start to see maybe areas like, I don't know, maybe, and I don't know what the heck's going on with my pen here, but maybe this region here tends to see increased opportunities for snow if conditions are favorable for it. But also with the shifting temperatures, if we were to get any warm-ups over here to occur, Then severe weather could even come into the equation for some of these areas, especially over towards the southern end of this region as well. So it's really intriguing, the finite details that we're still trying to hash out at this point as to how things will ultimately be affected by this. Because I've seen either or occur. Sometimes it'll even happen in the same season. It all depends on the trend that we're on at this point. And I'm going to fix that after this video. I don't know why I have such a wide point on my marker there. Sorry if that was a bother to you guys. But again, this kind of further proves my early hypothesis here, with the potential for maybe some increased winter weather activity, especially over towards those northern states. Now, again, the thing about this is, with us looking so far into range, and also with us looking at 90-day averages, of course, it's all subject to change. But I have this sneaky suspicion that we might see a couple bigger events, especially over towards the Great Lakes and over towards the Ohio Valley. I think that's going to be a point of interest going forward here. So definitely something we will be watching with great interest here. So if we go ahead and keep this rolling here, and we take a look at our ENSO probabilities, we have all three of the phases up here, and here they are. We have La Nina in the blue, neutral ENSO in the gray, and then the El Nino in the red. So we don't have to worry about El Nino at this point. It's really the neutral ENSO and the La Nina phase that we're going to be paying the most attention to. And of course, as you see, as we go through fall, is where we have the greatest probability of being in that La Nina phase. And this persists as we get into the early part of winter. But if you look towards this first 3-month period, which has December, January, and February, then look to the next one, JFM, January, February, March, look what happens. We start to shift the other way now to where we have a neutral ENSO beginning to occur here. And as a result, we end up getting potentially a big shift here, and this always tends to cause big alterations with the weather. So as a result, I would really keep an extra close eye on these 3 months going forward. Now, as far as the significance of the figures right now, this is probably going to be the biggest kink in these outlooks and any predictions here. Because if we end up seeing a slight change with this teleconnection to the point where we end up going back to neutral ENSO, the weather is going to probably get a little bit wackier. But if we can be a little bit more consistent, maybe cold air might last. But there's another wrinkle in this that I'm about to show you that only further increases the uncertainty. And it's really this reason why why forecasting this long into range here is an absolute headache. So here we are looking at the teleconnections. Anyone that's been a longer time viewer, you know what the deal is here. We look at two particular areas on this map for the most part. But today I'm going to also point out a third region, which is important. So this is us looking at the December monthly look on this map. And we're going to just kind of go forward through the rest of the winter months here. So we have our little blob of cold air over here. But if you look over towards the North Pole, this is our Arctic oscillation. And we're kind of a little bit out of whack. Why do you think that is? Because if we go back the month before and the months prior, we were kind of on the edge of being in a negative phase. And you can see these pressure lines here, these contour lines. They're not tight, so we're kind of in we're not in the positive phase like we normally would be, because when we're in a positive phase, the pressure's strong here. Cold air tends to tends to stay at home. Geez, I could not get those words out at all. But cold air tends to stay at home with stronger pressure over here. The pressure being a little bit weaker, usually that means that this will make a little bit more of a push to the south. You look at these contour lines, it kind of highlights that issue. And then also, if you look over here, this could be the culprit as to why that is. Some stratospheric heating, and this is usually a signal potentially for, well, the dreaded P word, polar vortex. Now, I'm not saying that this does happen, but this signal does intrigue me greatly because I've seen this before, and usually what follows is a pretty significant push of cold air. Now, who gets that at this point? The jury is out. Like, I'm not going to make a prediction yet. Like, there's just no way I can reasonably give you that any kind of expectation with this. But really, at this point, we're looking for trends. We're not looking for a final forecast. Otherwise, that's what this video would have been named. But fact in the matter is, we're seeing a correlation between these two matching up early on, and it does lead to some suspicion as to what comes. And then you kind of see a little bit more of that kind of going on here. And then you see maybe another push trying to occur here at this point. I'm not willing to latch onto this signal because it's not as apparent to me, but it is something else that we will be keeping an eye on. And this is right around the time where winter begins to start. And then as we go into January, getting into the new year, we kind of see another push of cold air beginning to occur. We're still looking like we're trending in a direction of maybe positive phases for both the Arctic oscillation here and then the North Atlantic oscillation. So this might help keep those northeastern states warm and keep a lot of that cold air off to the north. With this warmer air mass off to the south, any sort of troughing with this could maybe yield to some severe weather potential with this as well. We have to see what some of the other variables are. Obviously, at this range, it's nearly impossible to latch on to anything at this point, but it's an interesting trend nonetheless. As we get into February, this is where things really start to get wacky. This is another big push of cold air beginning to come in at this point. So, man, all I can say is winter looks like it could be one to remember if these trends were to stick around. But like I said, all of this is subject to change. Model data updates regularly. But another thing that I want to make sure is that I don't want to try to stuff these constant changes down your face. So down your throat. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to make another update maybe mid-October and then kind of go on from that point. And then as we get towards March, we're getting into spring, seeing this cold air mass right here along with this little warm area that's a little bit sus. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But that sudden change in air mass here from cold to warm here might lean into more active severe weather season, along with other parameters, of course, as well. But it looks like this winter could be one that flip-flops a lot. We could get significant cold at times, could get well above average. So pretty much at this point, nothing is off the table, I should say. So some things that we're going to be keeping a very close watch on going forward. And then if you want a closer look at what it looks like from the perspective of the lower 48, not so much the northern hemisphere, this is a look at where the cold air masses, the warm air masses, and usually it's in between these 2 points is where the battle zones are for our most active weather. So we get into December, heading into January. Again, it seems like this is the point of interest. I'm really intrigued as to what January may have to offer with this. You can see maybe some early signs of troughing trying to occur here. It still looks pretty zonal, so it's not a lot for me to latch on. But I think that as a result, over towards maybe the Gulf states, the Gulf Coast particularly, could be a point of interest maybe for some severe weather. So we go further into range here. This is where I think winter weather really could start to dominate as we head into the back half of winter. Then as we get towards the beginning of spring here, this might be where Dixie Alley could take over for severe weather. We've had some earlier starts. This could be another one of those, or it could be a complete nothing burger, but we'll see what happens with this. So in regards to the temperatures, which is always a big topic during this time of year, we're going to start out winter most likely above average for a lot of us in the deep south, and pretty well above average, which could be a little bit troublesome potentially, depending on, again, other parameters here. The storm track is active. We get anything to dip south. We get the cold clashing with the warm. Who knows what could happen? I've seen setups like that before, and I'm not going to mention any of those particular setups, but yeah, might need to be watchful of severe weather based off of this early look here. As we go towards January, still pretty warm across most of the lower 48 at this point, well above average for quite a few of us. As we get into these darker shades of orange and into the reds, we're talking about 10 degrees above average or more, maybe 15 to 20. And then February, look at how we start to slowly but surely pull the Uno reversal card here. Some of these areas that were well above average now, especially over towards the Midwest, are now about 5 to 10 degrees below average. So that's a pretty big swing. And then as we get towards March, this is where things kind of really intrigue me the most, where we have those most significant below average temperatures over towards the northern states. But look how far south this ends up pushing as well. I think as a whole here, this is probably going to be the most unpredictable month. Nothing too far out of the norm with March being an unpredictable month, but any minute change to this could have significant impacts here. So let's go ahead and now take a look at our precip guidance here. And the most consistent trend that I've seen, and the one that intrigues me the most, is seeing where we have that increased precip like we were talking about over towards the Gulf states, over towards the Deep South, the Ohio Valley, and over towards the Northwest. Again, I'm thinking that these 2 points here might be where we have the most significant opportunity for wintry precip and much more. Now, if we were to go ahead and move this even further along into February, where that cold air pushes further to the south, this could be the point where that Tennessee Valley and areas further south might have an opportunity at some winter weather. Again, can't really just jump on the bandwagon and say it's going to happen, especially this far out in the range, but the look so far is intriguing. And then as we get towards March, look at that precipitation signal that pops up over here towards Dixie Alley. Like I said, I really think that based off of these early looks here, this might be an area to watch for sure for severe weather. But with all of that in mind here, and the fact that we're almost 25 minutes into this video, really 22 at this point, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some analogs here. And the thing is, and it's funny that I say this, as I look at this now, and I've realized that we've now had record keeping for over 75 years. The months, just like in the October outlook, that I'm going to be watching for is really towards 96 and 97. The analogs that I would urge you to look at would be between 1985, 1986, and 1996, 1997. Those winter years are kind of interesting, and then also the months that followed with that, as we've shifted from a weak La Nina into neutral into the weather, has had a reputation for being a little bit more on the wilder side. So I'm expecting a more active winter as a whole based off of this. Of course, as we mentioned, things are subject to change, but take notes now. If we end up being right, cool. But more importantly, the main objective of this video is to help keep you prepared. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'm looking forward to making another one of these in a few months. But until then, I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.